It wasn't an algorithm. You need to understand that first. The images and sounds you were shown, the cryptic numbers that appeared in your recommendations, that was a signal, a tuning fork resonating with something already inside of you. You were chosen because you are one of the few who senses that the reality we see is just a fraction of the whole story, a beautiful, hypnotic, but fragmented echo. For months, you've been collecting those echoes, feeling their power without understanding the source. Consider this video the first translation of that source. This is not another theory or a guess. This is the blueprint, the very architecture of the philosophy you've been subconsciously drawn to. What you are about to see is the key that elevates you from a mere spectator of the mystery to an active participant in its unfolding. The puzzle pieces are in your hands. Now, let's begin to assemble them.
There is a territory that appears on no official map. No satellite has ever surveyed it. No probe ever gathered its data. And yet, you cross it every day. A landscape made of forgotten curves, erased crossroads, ruins that were never built in the first place. In moments of stillness, you call it I, and when it frays, you call it confusion. But it is always there, invisible, habitable, unstable. Even before a fully formed thought emerges, every mind maps out boundaries, sets limits, and draws its own axes and symmetries. Some minds build ivory towers, others dig tunnels. There are those who dwell beneath ethereal domes, and those who lose themselves in interconnected rooms with no obvious exit. But all minds, one way or another, construct. These are interior architectures, certainly, but they are not merely metaphors. Neuroscience speaks of neural maps, systemic psychology of relational spaces, and phenomenology, with its elegant obstinacy, reminds us that every experience is situated. But these terms are nothing more than road signs at the entrance of a city in a continuous state of metamorphosis, an urban fabric that pulses and contracts, collapses and rebuilds itself without asking anyone's permission. You inhabit your mind exactly as one inhabits a house built of uncertain thresholds. There are some doors you will never open, while others fling wide of their own accord, especially in your dreams. On some days, the kitchen becomes a labyrinth, the living room expands into a cathedral, and only the cellar, that very cellar, remains forever dark. No two minds are identical, just as no two cities are the same. But even within a single individual, the map is never constant. It changes scale, direction, inclination. Anger relocates to a new district. Love retreats to a distant glade. Nostalgia slips into alleys you never noticed before. And also there are the foundations, the ones you don't see, the ones often found precisely where something has already collapsed. It is exactly in such cracks that the mind decides to place its pillars, not in smooth surfaces, but in points of fracture, as if it needed an original uncertainty in order to build at all. There are even names for these places. Bion called them emotional containers. Jung spoke of primordial images. The Gnostics envisioned them as eons, intermediate spaces between the manifold and the unspeakable. In the end, however, every one of these theories is nothing more than an attempt to measure the air with a ruler. But it is useful to try. There is yet another, more obscure word that happens to be my favorite: topophilia, the love of places, not only geographical ones, but the hidden locations of the soul, the scent of a wall, the light in an empty room, a word repeated mentally like a spell. These are not merely words, they are coordinates. Every mind has its own psychotopology, a secret landscape mapped out of certain personal symbols layered emotions, and architectural structures of meaning that often contradict one another. And this psychotopology is not fixed. It folds, twists, reshapes itself with every jolt. A traumatic event can shift entire districts of the soul, inverting the map entirely. What was the center becomes the outskirts. A forgotten margin becomes the beating heart. Likewise, a sudden love can open a gateway to a new mental garden or an abyss. Representing these landscapes faithfully is nearly impossible. Matteo Ricci, a Jesuit of the 16th century, attempted to chart mental knowledge with diagrams, rooms of memory, corridors of intelligence, salons of ideas. Borges imagined a map that coincided perfectly with such a territory, and thus replaced and annulled it. For a map that is too exact becomes the territory itself and, consequently, ceases to be useful. The more you attempt to define your inner geography, the more you lose yourself in this process. That is why some prefer to close their eyes. Not to escape anything, but to recall something essential, with skin, with bone. Have you ever noticed how certain thoughts always return to the same point in your body? A weight on the chest, tension behind the eyes, a hollow between the shoulder blades. This is not imagination, it is architecture. A somatic map of the mind, as if every emotion were a traveler stubbornly returning to the same station. The mind builds, the mind inhabits, the mind forgets. But the structures remain, even when they seem to have vanished, even when you no longer believe in them, the way the foundations of a submerged temple remain, invisible but present, ready to support something you don't yet know you want to build. And you return, always, even when you think you've changed course, even when you say you're someone else, even when you don't want to. Because every mind is a territory, and every territory, sooner or later, calls back its inhabitant. Not everything you call yours truly belongs to you. There are emotions that seem to arise spontaneously, yet arrive from somewhere else entirely. A shared dream, a word that slips in from another lexicon, a scent that moves you for no reason you can name. It is at those strange, blurred points that contact zones appear, the places where mental maps overlap, where lines smear, where one territory bleeds quietly into another. And it is in these intermediate spaces that collective emotional maps are born, symbolic topographies no one has ever drawn, yet that everyone crosses, quietly and unconsciously, like nocturnal animals returning to the same water source without knowing why. When two minds brush against each other, even for only a moment, a glance, a word, a misunderstanding, a faint distortion occurs, the way two magnetic fields resonate. Their inner maps, even for an instant, attempt to align. They do not always succeed. Sometimes they simply repel one another. But when they do overlap, even partially, something unrepeatable takes place. A third space is generated, a space no one truly controls. It is a psychic interzone, as Burroughs might have called it, where familiar laws soften and symbols begin to behave strangely. It belongs to neither one nor the other. It is the residue of the encounter, an echo. In ancient communities, tribes, clans, initiatory circles, these shared territories were acknowledged, marked out, even sanctified. Myths were never merely stories. They were collective maps, instruments for navigating the invisible. They did not so much explain the world as orient it. And they were inhabited by figures that were not simply characters, but coordinates: the hero, the mother, the traitor, the double. Archetypes functioning as the cardinal points of a collective consciousness. They formed bridges between the individual inner maps and that fluid, shared geography we now call the cultural unconscious, or, if you will, a kind of morphogenetic field. Actually, it's quite easy to recognize when you are walking through one of these spaces. Perception turns liquid, edges blur, meanings begin to resonate like distant bells. You think of someone you have not seen in years and meet them the very next day. You read a sentence and then hear it echoed in a song. You live through something and feel that it does not fully belong to you. These are not coincidences in the banal sense. They are interferences between maps, overlaps, and perhaps even interpenetrations. Not all maps are compatible. Some, when brought near, create only friction. Others fuse and produce a sudden ecstasy akin to falling in love. In such cases, the shared territory can become a secret garden, an ephemeral kingdom where two minds move in synchrony, like blind dancers who know the steps by heart. But it never lasts long, for the tide always recedes, leaving behind only broken shells and sand soaked in sleep. Yet in certain instances, the contact persists and the imprint endures long after. A crack is formed that belongs to no one. It is simply there, straddling two minds, two times, two idioms. It is a threshold, a fissure between mental territories that collided too forcefully. And it is through that fissure that certain voices may pass, the ones you hear just before sleep, the ones that seem to come from a place you recognize but have never seen. There is a theory suggesting that shared mental space generates a kind of amplified resonance. Rupert Sheldrake spoke of morphic fields capable of transmitting patterns between similar beings. It is one of those ideas too fascinating to be true and too strange to be entirely false. But perhaps it does not even need to be true. It only needs to work as a key to unlock something, even for just a few seconds. Myths, as we were saying, are maps. But there are other instruments too. Rituals, dances, sacred architectures, and even certain songs you cannot forget. All of these function as symbolic portals. They are not built to explain. They are built to synchronize, to create a shared mental space that is temporary but real, a free zone of consciousness. There are cities that seem to embody this liminal dimension. Prague, with its concealed alchemies. Fez, a labyrinth straight out of a fever dream. Venice, never quite where you expect it to be. In such places, the mental maps of those who wander through them seem to merge into some hidden melody, as if the space were soaked in unspoken thoughts, sedimented emotions, and symbols left behind by those who came before. This is not spiritualism. It is effective geography. But contact zones do not appear only at humanity's great crossroads. They can easily emerge inside an elevator, in a glance exchanged between strangers, in a half-finished sentence, in a dream you do not remember, but that leaves you strangely shaken. Every mind is an island, yes, but the waters that separate them are not empty. They are full of faint currents, of signals, of symbolic residue. And sometimes, right there between the waves, a bridge forms. Brief, fragile, imperfect, but real. Not everything you think is yours. Not every emotion originates within you. There is a part of you that vibrates with the other, that navigates spaces it does not know, yet moves through with surprising ease. These are the shared territories, the composite psychotopologies, the maps that overlap. And sometimes, precisely at those points of contact, something takes shape that was present in neither mind. A new symbol, a vision, a fruitful resonance. Now imagine a map that is not flat, not even three-dimensional. It bends over itself, it twists, it contorts. Imagine an inner geography that follows neither longitudes nor latitudes, but emotional logics, symbolic curves, torsions of meaning. And now, stop imagining, because this map is you. Every mind is structured upon a surface that eludes conventional geometry. It is not Euclidean. It is not Cartesian. It is closer to topology than to geometry. What counts is not distance, but connection. A childhood memory can lie adjacent to a recent trauma. An ancient symbol can trigger an immediate reaction in the present. Meanings chase one another in a disjointed dance, as if the mind itself had been built upon a Mobius strip, where inside and outside, above and below, are only provisional distinctions. Every point can be reached from several directions, but never the same way. There are places of the mind that appear only when you look at them from a specific angle, like those dream corners that vanish the instant you wake, like passages that open only once you have stopped searching for them. The folds, the fractures, the invisible seams that stitch together the distant regions of the soul are often what gives shape to everything else. Yet, by their very nature, they remain elusive. What remains is intuition, a vague impression that something has shifted, that a connection has been made, that a dark meaning is trying to surface even though it has not yet found the words. The mind is not made of watertight compartments. It is more like a capillary network, a branching structure that extends beyond itself. Archetypes are not merely inherited images. They are nodes within this network, resonance points between the individual and the collective. They act as psychosymbolic attractors, bending the mental map around themselves. Jung called them the contents of the collective unconscious, but the word collective already betrays their ambiguity. They are yours, and yet they do not belong to you. They activate, they take up position, they guide you, but they never fully obey your commands, like ancient gods in retirement who return now and then to remind you they still exist. Each time you encounter a symbol that shakes you, a face, a word, a gesture, you are not simply reading a sign. You are passing through a fold, a point at which your mental topology turns vulnerable, porous, traversable. And if you are attentive, you might glimpse, for a moment, another room behind the wall, another timeline snaking along beneath your own, a crack in the weave, a possibility. In Jewish mysticism, there is an intriguing idea, Shevirat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels. According to this account, the primordial light was too intense for the vessels meant to contain it, and so they shattered. Ever since, we have lived in a universe scattered with fragments, and every being, every object, every event holds just a spark of that light, and also a trace of that original fracture. It is a powerful metaphor for the structure of the psyche itself. Any mental container that tries to hold a total meaning is destined to crack. But it is precisely through that crack that something true can filter in. Psychosymbolic topologies are riddled with anomalies, places where time dilates, where emotions multiply, where images entangle without any apparent logic. Yet, it is exactly there that the most potent forms of meaning sprout. Not in coherence, but in the rift. Not in the straight line, but in the spiral. Mythic time behaves much the same way. It is not sequential, but resonant. For an event occurs and then echoes both backward and forward, warping the mental map, creating new connections that did not exist before. There is a kind of knowledge that cannot be transmitted, only traversed. It has to be inhabited. It works not through the contents of the mind, but through its topologies. What matters is how you move, not what you find. It is the movement itself that generates meaning. In the design of sacred space, especially in certain Eastern temples, architectural structures are conceived to alter perception, Corridors that narrow, staircases that lead into emptiness, halls with impossible acoustics. These are not flaws. They are maps designed to disorient the ordinary mind and to force it to change its topology, to bend, to yield, to pass through. And something very similar happens within you whenever a certainty cracks, or when a doubt finally finds a home. There is a delicate art to walking these folds. It asks for attention, but also for surrender, for presence, but also for forgetfulness. You cannot explore them by force. You have to let yourself be carried, like a light object drifting in a magnetic field. And then, every so often, when you least expect it, a passage appears. A symbolic short circuit, a deep resonance, and in that instant, you understand, or believe you understand, that the map was never meant to be read, but crossed. Not to bring you to a fixed point, but to allow something to emerge. The topologies of the mind are like intelligent fabrics. They adapt, they react, they remember. And hidden passages dwell within their weave, not shortcuts, but thresholds, not answers, but transitions. Every fracture is an opportunity, every fold is an invitation, every discontinuity is a possible access point. But you have to recognize it and be willing to lose your way. Because those who try to map everything end up erasing the invisible trails, and it is precisely those trails that carry you the farthest. See you in the next episode.